All right, well, thank you, everyone, for being here today. My name is Ryan Patrick. I'm the United States Attorney for the Southern District of Texas. Up here with me is Sarah Cole. She's the Acting Special Agent in charge for the IRS, the Houston Division. Perry Turner, he's the Special Agent in charge for the FBI Houston Division. And then also Neil Sanchez, Special Agent in charge of the Department of Education Office of Inspector General. We're here today to discuss what is known as the Clough case. It's the United States versus the Cloughs. This was a husband and wife that ran a set of charter schools, the Varnett Charter Schools, that they used as, in a sense, their own personal piggy bank. Through a tip from someone who was affiliated with the schools, and I just learned from an agent with a different agency, not standing up here, knew something was up, contacted our office, and that started the investigation a few years ago. And Quincy Olson, Assistant U.S. Attorney here, did a fantastic job on this case. But what we're here to talk about also is not just the guilty plea, but also the restitution we were able to collect in this case, done by Martha Minnis, who did work with our office, and the rest of the FLU staff, our financial litigation section. What the Cloughs did is use this set of charter schools as pass-throughs for their own financial gain. They each pled guilty to counts of tax evasion, and then the wife, Marion Clough, also pled guilty to a count of mail fraud. The specifics on how the restitution is paid back to the parents in this case, which is unique. I'll let the Department of Education speak to that exactly. But overall, we were able to collect the entire amount of restitution for everyone damaged in this case, which was $4.4 million. Of that, the IRS, and they will speak to their piece of this, is $1.8 million in restitution to the IRS. Almost $1.9 million back to the school itself, which is still in operation but under a new board of directors. $100,000 to an insurance company based on a policy taken out that got caught up in this criminal scheme. Almost $7,400 each individually to two employees of the school, which we'll get into that in a second. And then a total of $604,889.79 to nearly 4,000 families of children who attended the Varnett schools over a period of time. We have the records, the attendance records of all of the students who were enrolled in those campuses over the course of 7 years. And these were public charter schools that no tuition was paid by the families for their children to attend these schools. But what the Cloughs did specifically to the parents in these families, many of them low income, were to, in essence, these are my words, they nickel and dimed the parents on extra things that the government was already paying for. So whether it was $3 to wear their street clothes on Friday when they should have worn their uniform, those $3 per kid went in the pocket of the Cloughs. An extra $5 here, $10 here for an extra field trip, something here, something there that was an extra on top of what the typical daily school schedule was. But all of that, most of it, was still reimbursable by the federal government, by your tax dollars. And so the Department of Education, and we were able to get a judge to agree to this restitution order to make these families as whole as possible per student, per year enrolled, for all of these little fees here and there that the Cloughs took and put in their pocket. Now, the overall fraud was about $4.4 million. And the Marshal Service, I want to give the Marshal Service a particular thank you in this case. They weren't able to be here today. But they did a fantastic job with, not only was the attorneys in my financial litigation section able to go in, take money out of bank accounts, retirement accounts, but there was a ranch, farm equipment, ranching equipment that was seized at auction, in addition to a very nice house on the south part of town that was also seized by the marshals by court order and also auctioned. That home was well over $1 million, and that went towards these proceeds as well. So last week was Victims' Rights Week. We weren't able to get everybody scheduled together to do this last week, but really want to highlight the importance of different agencies working together, not only to get the criminal conviction, which is important. This was a fraud straight up and down. But as all of us here can attest to, and all of the attorneys who work these cases and work so hard on these fraud cases, it is rare when there's actually assets to seize, bank accounts to take, values, whether it's cars or homes, something of value. Oftentimes, the money's gone. It's spent on vacations. It's spent on consumables. There's not actually assets to go in and seize and make the victims whole. So in this case, we're able to keep the school afloat, and the school is able to continue doing what it's supposed to do, which is educate children. And we're also able to, in a small part, make the families whole, but also protecting the taxpayer and the Treasury because of the $1.8 million in back taxes that were owed this scheme. So I'll turn it over to Perry and comments he wants to make on behalf of the FBI's involvement in this case. Perry.
Everybody, good afternoon. I'd like to thank U.S. Attorney Ryan Patrick and his office for seeing justice through these victims who entrusted the clubs to provide quality education for their children. I'm also pleased to be here with our partners from the IRS and Department of Education's Office of Inspector General, who we partnered with on the original investigation. The FBI works diligently with our law enforcement partners to investigate numerous fraud cases that take advantage of the hard-working men and women of the Houston community. In this particular case, the clubs use their positions of trust to embezzle millions of dollars from parents in our education system. The money they stole was intended for school children who they were supposed to serve. Instead, they chose to serve themselves. As a husband of an elementary school teacher, my wife has taught school for over 20 years. This case sort of hits home close for me. I know the value that my wife places on her students and the trust that their parents place in her as a school teacher. This is an unusual case for us. We typically deal with victims in the initial stages of an investigation, and that's not every day we can sit alongside our partners and present a sizable restitution check to the victims of this case. We hope the restitutions brings the club victims a portion of the justice they deserve. The FBI will continue fighting for victims here in Houston, and we will do so alongside our local, state, and federal partners. Also want to thank our forensic accountant, Catherine Prado, who's in the audience. Catherine, please raise your hand. Did a great job in working hard, crunching numbers, identifying the total loss in this investigation, along with the IRS and also the Department of Education. Thank you all for your time and opportunity to speak here today, and I'll now turn it over to the Department of Education.
Good afternoon. Thank you, everyone, for coming out today. Again, my name is Neil Sanchez. I'm the Special Agent in charge of the U.S. Department of Education, Office of Inspector General, Southern Region. I don't know if you know this, but the Department of Education, we're somewhat of the Inspector General's office is really the law enforcement branch, or I guess arm of the U.S. Department of Education. As part of our responsibilities, we conduct criminal investigations involving Department of Education funding and programs. What we are here to talk about today is a good example of our commitment to investigating allegations of significant fraud and corruption involving education funds, taxpayer funds that are really intended for the educational development of children and for their benefit. As previously stated, the clubs engaged in a public corruption campaign and profited at the expense of the community's children in need of educational assistance. The scheme was particularly egregious because it not only victimized taxpayers, but it also victimized those that are most vulnerable in our community. As part of the scheme, as was mentioned earlier, the school charged parents or collected from parents fees for field trips, fundraisers, other activities that were already paid for by the school. And so the monies really didn't go that were collected to go to the benefit of the school or the students, but instead they were funneled into this off-books account, which was used almost exclusively by the clubs for their personal benefit. I want to commend the OIG special agents and our law enforcement colleagues who investigated this matter and the efforts of the financial litigation unit of the U.S. Attorney's Office and the U.S. Marshals Service for ensuring that the victim parents were held, were made whole in this case. I'm especially grateful to U.S. Attorney Patrick for holding this press conference today and shining the spotlight on this type of public corruption. The OIG will continue to aggressively pursue those who misappropriate education funds for their own benefits and purposes. America's students and taxpayers deserve nothing less. Thank you.
Real quick, why don't you speak a little bit? People are probably wondering. So explain the $110.02 per pupil per year and how you all got to that number.
All right. So some of the records, some of the records we're unable to determine exactly the origin of some of the payments that came from parents as to what parents made those particular payments. So there was a formula or a calculation put into place where it was determined based on the amount of funding that was funneled into this off-books account, the number of years, and the number of students enrolled at the school. So what was determined was a per pupil allocation per year. So from my understanding, if one parent had one student attend for 1 year, they would receive that per pupil allocation, which is $110.02. However, if a student had, if a parent had multiple students, which attended multiple years, so say for example, a parent had 3 students attend for 3 years, so they would get that parent would get 9 times the per pupil calculation. So it would be, instead of 110.02, it would be 990.18. Does that make sense? Any other questions regarding that? Or any questions? Thank you. Sir.
Good afternoon. Again, my name is Sarah Cull, and I'm the acting special agent in charge for the IRS Criminal Investigations Houston Field Office. My office is responsible for criminal tax enforcement and other financial crimes committed within the Southern District of Texas. Criminal investigation is the criminal enforcement division of the IRS and the only federal law enforcement agency with the authority to investigate tax crimes. I want to start by thanking the U.S. Attorney's Office, who prosecuted this case, and our federal partners, specifically the FBI and the Department of Education Office of Inspector General, who combined their efforts and investigative expertise to prove the allegations in this case. As the founding superintendent of Houston's Varnett Public Schools, Mary Ann Clough and her husband admittedly siphoned millions of dollars in funds intended for the operation and function of the charter school and its programs. These funds came from the parents, school vendors, insurance companies, and federal agencies intended to fund the students' education. Instead of being used for the school, the embezzled funds were used for the Clough's personal expenses, such as purchasing high-end jewelry, clothing, extensive traveling, and furnishing their 7,000 square foot home. The Cloughs also failed to pay over $1.8 million in income taxes, which includes penalties and interest, to the Internal Revenue Service on the money they received from the scheme. IRS criminal investigation enforces the nation's tax laws, but also takes particular interest in cases in which someone, especially in a public trust position, has taken what belongs to others for their own personal benefit. In this case, the parents paid their money anticipating gaining a higher education for their children, but to find out the money was used to fund the Clough's lavish lifestyle. The true victims of this case are the students of Varnett who were promised a good education. Not only did the Cloughs betray the public's trust by diverting funds intended for the benefit of underprivileged students for their own personal gain, but also conspired to defraud the IRS and evade paying their taxes. IRS criminal investigation is committed to identifying and holding accountable those that seek to enhance their lives by misappropriating funds intended to educate our children. Thank you.
Thank you all. I want to mention 2 things that I failed to mention before. So in the handouts, you'll see that on the restitution order signed by the judge, there's 2 payments of $7,394. Without getting too much into the weeds on what this money is about, this is how the Cloughs operated their school. Those are 2 employees of the school who were in charge of a fundraiser. They didn't sell enough in the fundraiser to hit the target the Cloughs wanted, so then they were threatened with their jobs to come up with the nearly $7,500 of their missed goal of the school fundraiser, which of course was fundraising for the Cloughs themselves. So it's all this money that was diverted into this off-books account. That's what they were not paying income taxes on. And that's also one way we were able to make whole these 2 employees who were basically blackmailed, embezzled for their own jobs at the school. Again, as we mentioned, here was a great case where the FBI was able to bring a lot of their manpower and expertise. Education OIG does terrific work, but they are spread out over a very large run. Your region covers a handful of states, 6 states? 9 states in the southern U.S. Sarah is responsible for half of Texas, basically everything, the southern half of Texas. So these are great collaborations where all these agencies are able to come together, bring their expertise to a project, bring their piece to make a case like this. And then we also have dedicated not only Quincy, who's the fraud prosecutor, who handles the initial part of it, make sure we actually get the guilty plea, get the sentence or tried if it needs to go to trial. But then we have the staff and attorneys in our financial litigation, and their job is to then go after and identify and, through court orders, seize assets, whether it's cash, bank accounts, retirement accounts, physical property, in this case, a mansion in Riverside Terrace, a ranch, implements, jewelry, like we said, and then through the legal process, have those confiscated and then sold at auction through the U.S. Marshal's Office to then be able to make all these folks whole. So that's what we have for you today. Thank you for coming, and we'll entertain any questions you may have. Yes?
I know that Clubs, before they were convicted, gave money for items to their son and both Hurricane Harvey victims. Was that money ever recovered from their relatives and from these unidentified victims?
We were able to recover what was in the possession of the Cluffs at the time we went to recover it. Yes?
How will parents get the money, and
Great
how
question.
are you going to, if someone, I see here that you're asking for someone to come forward if they haven't heard from you. So what should they do if they were enrolled in that time?
Great question. So through the victim services folks with FBI, but our office, our victim witness office we have, like I said, we have 7 years of school records. So we have addresses and contact information for everybody who went to the Varnett School in this time period that we're focusing on. We believe about 90% of those addresses are good, that we have sent communication out to them. We've received back affirmative responses, probably about half of those. So there's about 10% outstanding is our guess that we have not heard back from, or at least their mail hasn't come back. So all of that money in the court order is allocated. It is sitting in the registry of the district clerk's office. We are getting them all of the good addresses that we have. Their goal is to cut all of the checks to the families in the appropriate amount, the $110.02 per pupil per year as appropriate per family, within 90 days. So those checks should be going out as soon as the clerk's office can get that done. And then the rest of the money that's not collected or we can't identify will sit in the clerk's registry until we're able to do that. And if there is someone who has not received a phone call or a letter from us, maybe they see this and they're able to come forward and we can get them what they are owed back. Yes?
Yes. Who's in charge of the school now, and is the DOJ involved in managing the school at all?
We are not involved in managing the school. My understanding is they have a new board of directors and the school is operating as a legitimate charter school now. And the Cluffs have not been involved in a while.
That is solvent and everything?
Yes, part of that solvency is the $1.8 million, almost $1.9 million of restitution back to the school itself.
Okay.
Any other questions? Yes?
Are charter schools more prone to this kind of fraud than other schools?
Not necessarily.
Okay.
No, we have,
Here, come on up here so they can hear
we've done, conducted investigations, as you know, the Beaumont ISD investigation, the Dallas Independent School District. So we have from public schools to charter schools to for-profit business colleges to even fraud and corruption at public universities. So it varies. It really isn't necessarily systemic to one particular type of institution.
Yes?
The victims have any kind of reaction? I know a lot of times you had mentioned you're not able to get back any kind of money, and these are some people that are in low-income situations, so to hear that they're able to get back any kind of money, what was their reaction to hearing something like this?
Where's our victim witness folks in the back? Keisha?
They were really excited.
They were excited, as I hope they would be.
They would be. So we're still getting calls even through today.
So even through today, we're still getting calls from folks. Because, Keisha, when did the letter start to go out notifying them that there was actually recovery?
We didn't send those letters as of yet because of the press conference. Those will actually go out by the end of this week. The people that we've been in contact with over the last 60 to 90 days, they've been calling in weekly just to see what the status was as far as the court hearing is concerned. So there's a handful that currently know.
So there were, my understanding, and from talking with them, there's been some victims who've been proactively involved with our office wanting to know the status of what's been going on. But there's some who probably are not aware of everything, and the check might be a total surprise.
What can you assure the parents that now they're there, they're not going to be, again, victimized? How can you guys try to send a message?
Well, it's like any other situation where a business, or in this case a school, goes on and there was allegations of fraud in the past. They have a new board of directors. And obviously, when something like this happens, and in this case, it started with, in effect, what I'll call a whistleblower, they know, in my experience in law enforcement and all theirs as well, you have the situation once everybody is looking looking at those organizations with a pretty sharp eye and making sure things are handled properly. But there's been, as far as I'm aware, there's been no allegations since then, and that the school is running on the up and up.
Has Texas Education Agency been involved at all with this process or helping with student operations of the school?
I don't know the answer to that. You do?
They were initially, they conducted an audit of the school and disclosed several of their findings to our office early on.
Any lessons learned, if I'm a parent and my school is asking for money, what should be a red flag if I'm a parent to make sure this doesn't happen to me down in the future?
Well, part of the way I understand this is part of their scam was telling the parents this is what the money is being used for and simply diverting it to their own needs. Had they been upfront about it, even this being a charter school and being publicly funded, had the monies actually gone to what they said they were going to go to, there probably wouldn't have been a problem. So it is difficult because anybody who tries to commit fraud, especially on this kind of scale, they're not stupid, and they know how to identify weaknesses in their own internal auditing systems or how the systems work. And so in a situation like this, it's difficult unless someone had inside information that they knew something was out of place. But like any other organization, if money's being spent in a way that doesn't seem right, if all the internal controls are handled by the same group of people. So the wife in this case, she's the one who basically ran the school, and the husband was sort of the operations director. Some of the allegations regarding him were contracts circling back around to him for maintenance, things like that. So it's very important for parents in these situations to be involved with the board, making sure that the board is truly independent, that those boards are asking the questions. Lots of nonprofits and organizations you see with fraud, particularly on a large scale, is it often goes back to is it set up in a way where the people running the organization, handling the money, and counting the money and checking the books, is there anybody else looking over their shoulder, and is there anyone above them that can even fire them? So if you've got such a small group of people in an organization like that, that should raise questions that they truly are, that there's an independent board overseeing the people who are actually handling money and doing the internal audits. Anyone else? Thank you all very much for coming.
Thank you.